And welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 93, season 2, episode 39. This week's portion is the portion known as Korach. And our topic this week, persuasion. I want to jump in right away onto the subject of persuasion because I think that we get to it very quickly in this week's reading. The story of Korach is well known to so many. Full-on revolution, rebellion within the camp, challenging the leadership position of Moses and Aaron through the person known as Korach. Korach is family. I think it always is said, right, that the person who is going to commit the coup is someone who's closest to you. In a week where here in Israel, new elections were announced or about to be announced, and the government crumbled, and it crumbled from within. So it sort of makes appropriate sense that we're reading about this story right now. But our focus today is on, really right away, the first word. The word in Hebrew is vayikach, and he took. Speaking specifically about Korach, it says that he took. It's not clear exactly what he took, but the famous commentary Rashi says that he took them with words. He convinced them. He persuaded people to join the rebellion, to come across to his side of the argument. And so whereas last year we focused very much in on the crisis nature of this story and Moses' reaction to Korach and the other 250 and how he handled that crisis, here I want to focus in on the persuasive part, which is Korach himself. And for the moment, at the outset, differentiate between persuasion and influence. They're not exactly the same thing. They both have the ultimate goal to change people's behavior. Perhaps it's simply a difference of how we go about trying to change people's behavior. Persuasion is typically speaking more through reasoning in an argument and a communication. Influencing people or imposing influence is typically speaking less of the spoken and more of an action, more based on an attitude or an approach, more based on behavior, or more often leveraging charisma and an overall personality, not through words, but through deeds of the leader. And ultimately what we know is that Korach seems to seek is power. And whether that power structure here that he seeks is to take over the leadership, or whether that's to remove Aaron and become the high priest, whatever the nature of that revolution specifically is, meaning him, Dathan, right, Aviram, and the 250, they're attacking the leadership position. They're attacking the power position in the camp. And whether or not we approach it that this is taking place immediately after the story of the spies, or at some other point in the progression or the downward spiral that is happening here in the book of Numbers, it's clear what's happening here. And so I wanted to jump in specifically into the space of persuasion because there seems to be a very clear delineation as to how one persuades. And in fact, it would seem that Korach attaches quite naturally to the ability to influence, but to persuade others to do something, to join something, to change their behavior, to change their perspective. And he seems to employ so many of the different traits of persuasion. And what we have to appreciate is the impact or the value proposition of persuasion more than anything else. President Eisenhower was quoted as saying, "I would rather try to persuade a man to go along, because once I have persuaded him, he will stick. If I scare him, he will stay just as long as he is scared, and then he's gone." fear is an incredible motivator for people to change their behavior, but only as long as they are afraid. The person who we're going to speak about specifically here, the person who identified what are the 7 universal principles of persuasion, Robert Cialdini, is quoted as saying, persuasion skills exert a far greater influence over others' behaviors than formal power structure do. That is to say that persuasion is, in fact, more powerful than formal power. Because you really are, by persuading someone, moving them to a completely different position and ultimately a completely different behavior, and you've convinced them that your position is correct, that your position is in fact their position. The quote, another great quote, the secret is to always let the other man have your way, is moving them to the position where they're now on your side. They now see it from your perspective. They're now acting from your space, and that it's now become their position as well. That's an incredible amount of influence, right? Because those two terms, persuasion and influence, do get confused, but it's actually an incredible amount of power, the ability to persuade. And we see it in all kinds of places. We see persuasion in marketing. We see it in all kinds of ads. In fact, Cialdini has another term that he calls persuasion, which is the messaging that's happening before they're actually trying to persuade you. The sort of the views, the imagery in an ad before they try to convince you to do something. It's persuasion. So we see it in marketing all the time. Whether that's a catchy phrase or it's, certain personalities that are appearing in ads, right? We get that. That's always happening. We see it in politics. Persuasion in politics. Politics is by and for itself entirely a process of persuasion. Politicians are tapping into different kinds of emotions to persuade a person to come across the aisle, perhaps, or to simply vote for them or to vote for their legislation. It's just a question of what principle or what avenue the politician is taking to get to the ultimate goal. So they'll tell stories rather than talk about specific policies. They'll apply to emotion rather than specific language. They want to appreciate where they're going in their mind of the person, what they're evoking in the person's mind to get them to do what it is that they want them to do. So we see it in a lot of different places. Politics, marketing, in our work environments. And perhaps it is that we want to become more persuasive. And maybe we should become more persuasive. Maybe we'll sell better. Maybe we'll communicate better. Maybe we'll be a more effective leader by virtue of the fact that we're more persuasive in our arguments. You can imagine the difference in an argument being made simply based on the facts, and so it's a list of factoids, or the person who is understood how to persuade, understands how to communicate in a certain way that draws somebody across. It gets them to be persuaded. It gets the person to, be off their game on some level and get them to be in a space where they can be convinced. And Korach goes through all of them rather effectively, and here they are. The 7 principles of persuasion are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, social proof, and unity. Those are the 7 principles. And Cialdini in his research identified these not simply in, just in politics or marketing. These are universal human behaviors for persuasion. And you can see them all in Korach. Just to paint the picture for a moment with Korach, he's not just a random person in the nation. He's from the family of royalty. He's a cousin of Moses. He's of the tribe of the Levites. He's already in a position of power. He's already quite knowledgeable about Bible and Bible law and God and the faith and the commandments and the tabernacle. He has a role to play in carrying the tabernacle when they move. He lives and sets his tent up in a specific location that's close to the tribe of Reuben. He's articulate. He is persuasive. He's convincing. He has many things going for him in this space. Timing, of course, is also important. If in fact this takes place after all the other things have taken place and we're on that downward spiral, then Korach is tapping into an incredible set of skills to persuade people towards his argument, to influence ultimately then their behavior, and then at the end to potentially seize power. So the first principle that Cialdini delineates is reciprocity, which is this: the people are obliged to give back to others in the form of a gift or some sort of behavior that they have received first. And we typically speaking are willing to sort of say, not a problem. We do a favor for somebody, we do something for them, we make something happen for them, say, oh, no big deal, not a big deal, don't worry about it. But in fact, it is a big deal. And it is in fact that something that we did for them does in fact influence their behavior and persuades their behavior to give back and to potentially give back more. He shows in his research, we can't go through everything, but it's totally worth reading his work on the matter of how tipping works in a restaurant. That when servers would give a small gift at the end, right before a person paid, then tipping went up by a very small percentage. When they doubled that, and specifically he talks about mints of all things, when they doubled the mint, so they gave you an extra fortune cookie in that restaurant, or whatever that item is, then not only did tips not double, they quadrupled. And if it was a case where the server would slightly walk away and come back and say, oh, you're such nice people, here's an extra item, they went up by 23%. So reciprocity works. Korach is in that position. He's of the tribe of Levi, of the Levites. He has done things for people. They benefited from his services. Potentially he's a teacher of Torah, a teacher of Bible, because he's already in the court of Moses. The second is the principle of scarcity. People want more of the things they can have less of. And so in a case like this, right, if you want to persuade someone, it's not simply to tell them the benefits of the gain if they choose the product. It's also to point out what is unique about your proposition, about your value offer here, and what you might lose if they don't consider your proposal. Korach is putting out to the idea that they could all be holy, or they should all be holy. And that they're lacking in something by virtue of the fact that they don't have that space or that opportunity, and what's standing in their way is Moses and Aaron. The third principle is the principle of authority. He clearly is an authority in this situation, right? He's not Moses, he's not Aaron, but again, he's of the tribe. The Bible specifically describes who his family is. The Bible describes the family from which Dathan and Aviram come from. They're from the tribe of Reuben. They're important people. All the commentaries talk about that these are highly intellectual, scholarly people, revered in the nation. They're authorities. And so when they speak, and they speak in this way, and they talk about what they feel is right for the nation, again, especially in the aftermath of these other disasters, and that they're going to be spending an extended period of time in the desert, one could see why they could be persuaded by those individuals. Next is consistency. This one I wonder about, but consistency is a principle within the 7 principles that Cialdini describes. And consistency is that people like to do things now based on what they've done before. And so they're willing to continue to go in a certain direction once a process has already been started. The one example that he gives is in a Drive Safely campaign, where if it simply was the case that a person had agreed to put a small postcard in their front window that they supported a Drive Safely campaign, that led to a 400% increase in the likelihood of them being able to and willing to put a much larger sign on their lawn. So it was a progression, a consistent progression in their behavior from one thing to the next. So the idea perhaps is to start small and to go big. And in this case, perhaps that's where Korach operates. But I'm not sure that the idea here of consistency is appropriate. The fifth principle is a principle of liking. People prefer to say yes to those that they like. And so what causes people to be liked? So we like people who are similar to them. We like people who pay us compliments. And we like people who cooperate with us towards a mutual goal. So in a space where people are upset, or perhaps they're angry at leadership, or perhaps they're grumbling already, or perhaps they're, destroyed by the idea they're going to be spending an extended period of time in the desert. They're not going to be getting out of the desert. And a person speaks into that, they can be viewed as liked. When they're voicing the words and the language or the messages that the people are feeling, then they are likable. That's a sort of a populist sort of approach. When the politician stands up, talks about all the things that ill society and blames the leadership, and is talking into the space that is your pain right now, unemployment, inflation, whatever it is, they become more likable. And so it is the case that that's a very powerful persuader. Number 6 is social proof. People will look to the actions and behaviors of others to determine their own. Social proof. So in this space where he is of the tribe of Levi and the other 250 are from the tribe of Reuben and they're viewed as scholars, it sort of makes sense. If these people are going to behave this way, or these people feel like it's okay to argue with Moses, to stand up to Moses, it doesn't even necessarily matter what the argument is. It happens to be that in the case here, the argument is that you've taken too much upon yourself. We should all be holy. It's an argument that Moses seemed to have agreed to already 2 weeks ago when he told Joshua, no big deal if all the people were more holy. So here you go, social proof. 250 of the leaders of the nation are already behaving in this way. Why aren't you? That works. And unity, the seventh, is unity. The more people feel like they're part of the group, the more they're like to behave as part of the group. That unity factor is important. So if you change the language when you're on a website from saying 300 people have downloaded this book, instead you say 1,500 people who want to get rid of 30 pounds or more, just like you, have downloaded this ebook. Whoop, I belong to that group. I'm unified. I'm part of it. I see myself in it. Then I'm more likely to behave in a certain way. I'm likely to be persuaded in a certain manner. You can go down the rabbit hole with these 7 principles of persuasion and show how much deeper it goes. It's all there. And so can appreciate the level of impact and the level then of power and influence that Korach is approaching with what it is that he's doing, the manner in which he goes about it, how he communicates those things. Now, that's the case with him in this case when the negative side. But our ability to become more persuasive holds massive opportunity for us in the work that we do in an ethical environment, to increase good behaviors, to increase altruism in society. There are many ways for us to become far more persuasive in our lives. And we can practice it. We can learn it. As much as it's an art that's going on, it's a skill set that maybe some of us don't have naturally. We can develop that skill set to become far more persuasive in it, whatever it is that we're doing. So, developing our communication skills, appreciating which words work, which words don't work. Which affect do I need to employ? Do I need to match a certain volume or emotion or softness in the way that I speak? When I'm looking at a person and talking to them, if they're speaking slowly and I'm speaking quickly, it doesn't work. So I need to maybe change the speed and the pace of my language to get there. When I taught many years ago and I would get frustrated or angry at the class, instead of getting loud, I'd get quiet. It was incredibly powerful and impactful. It had far more weight to it by being quiet than being loud. And it was able to move the students, persuade them to change their behavior based on that approach rather than to, get loud and get mad and get angry. And so we can change things by building a certain level of rapport with people and that way become far more persuasive. And so there are things that we can do. We can become better listeners. We've talked a lot about listening. Listening better is an incredible way to become far more persuasive because when you're listening better, you're appreciating the other person's point of view. You're establishing a level of authority and trust and like with the other person that allows for what it is that you want to then argue to become more apparent and more likely to be listened to. And so there's a lot of interpersonal skills and logic and reasoning skills that we can work on to become far more persuasive in the work that we do. Again, not looking to do it or to use it in spaces like a Korach or similar, but in our everyday lives to become better in the work that we're doing and to have greater amount of persuasion and then influence and maybe even power, but ultimately towards greater success if we become far more persuasive in our work. So persuasion as a coachable skill, totally there. If it is something that we are lacking and we're aware of something that we're not as persuasive as we need to or want to or can be, there are practices that we can employ to become far better at it and then ultimately feel better about the work that we're doing and the success that we're having by virtue of having implemented a practice style, a deliberate practice and becoming better at this. Persuasive speeches, conversations, practicing with another, reviewing that practice, all those things make for much greater level of persuasion, which by extension then is a greater ability to lead and ultimately a greater sense of influence, if that's what we're seeking, but impact, if that's hopefully what it is that we're ultimately seeking at the end of it. And so that's really how we're thinking about it. Influence as a result of persuasion, power as a result of persuasion, but as I said, hopefully, obviously, on the ethical and positive side. But if we're seeking impact, something that I'm very interested in, then persuasion is a great way to look at it. It's a great thing to think about. It's a great way to operate, taking the lessons on the negative side from Korach and applying them to the positive so we can become far more persuasive. I'm repeating myself. Sorry. And ultimately to have greater success. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week.